You're watching Profiles with Scott Birmingham. This week's guest, Joe Hart, evening anchor. Hi, and welcome to a brand new webcast of Profiles. I'm your host, Scott Birmingham. Today, this week, our guest is a guy who I'm actually very fond of. When I first started watching News 4 and I was working for a competing station when I came here to Reno about 10 years ago now, I was just very impressed by how he was, how he read. I remember when I left that station and came here, I was doing the night side and I got to meet him a little bit better. And today is my opportunity to actually put him on the other side of the mic, so to speak. My guest, Mr. Joe Hart. Joe, thank you for coming on.
Scott,
I
thanks for having me.
appreciate
Great
it.
to be here.
People are going to be able to see this in a way that's not so much you reading the news, but now you're on the other side and answering questions. Have you ever been in a position where you were actually having to answer questions on a lighter scale?
Boy, not very often. Maybe a class project here and there where a student will come up and call up and want to interview us for things like that. But normally, no, we sort of have the luxury of being the ones who are asking the questions and grilling other people. So good little change.
Well, let me ask you, in fact, I was just thinking about when we had the fires Cullen Ranch.
Yeah.
You live up in that area, correct?
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about, from your perspective, when that happened, how it affected you and your family. I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, that was interesting. In November, I guess it was, and that night, that whole area started going up in flames, and it was the wind gust like I had never seen before, and it was 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning at this point, and homes were burning. I was driving around up in my neighborhood off Ridgeview behind Lake Ridge Golf Course up there, and watching homes burn, and firefighters couldn't keep up with it. That's how out of hand it all was. And then I called into the station. I remember I called in and I said, I can't leave here, but I can do phone reports for you and tell you what's going on. But it was the first time I'd been so close to a story and so involved, because it was where I lived, that I realized I couldn't leave. I couldn't get into work. I had to stay there at the time. And anyway, through the course of the night, the two houses directly across the street from me burned to the ground, which was so tough to see and so awful. And neighbors, friends of mine, and they're now about a month away from moving into their homes as time moves on and progress has been made, so that's good. But it was tough, and I ended up coming into work the next day. But it was a tough thing. I felt so lucky that my house was still standing, but so rattled by the whole ordeal and watching these houses burn, and it was definitely a mixture of emotions. And at one point we did get evacuated down below, and I remember I was doing a phone report with the anchors who were here on the set, and they said at the time, you have no idea right now whether your home is still standing or not. And it's it was one of those questions we ask people in those situations, but it was interesting and sort of unnerving to be on the receiving end of a question like that. I said, I don't know. I said, nobody knows right now in this area whether their homes are still standing, but I was lucky, bottom line.
Well, and I use this as an example of an irony that plays out, because on one side it's very personal. Your home could be easily on the line.
Yeah.
On the other side, there's a job. You're also reporting information to other people.
Yeah.
I mean, it's almost like the beat cop that a crime happens, and they're a cop, but yet they're not on duty per se, but they are on duty.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, there was some of that, because as I was up there that night watching everything that was going on, immediately I thought, I have to call in, because we're going to be going on the air with a fire of this magnitude, a fire this out of control. That's what we do. We go on the air and give the viewers the information and get started that way. So I knew there was an obligation that way, but it just it does click in when you're in this business. You've been doing it this long. I think I've been at this maybe 25 years now. And it does just take over, where when you have to respond and what the job is. So it's not a 9-to-5 job where you clock out and you don't hear what's going on. You're always paying attention to what's happening, and then if something does break, like in this situation, the Cullen fire, I had a situation, an obligation to keep track of what was going on at home, but also I felt to call in and help out any way I could. And for the first, the first night, the first overnight hours, I just roamed around in my car calling in reports. But I still felt like I was contributing and helping, and people commented after that those reports were helpful to them, to let them know what was going on. But it's definitely an interesting thing. It doesn't happen all that often.
As I say.
Luckily, where you are caught in a situation. I've seen reporters in that situation and kind of wondered before what that must be like, and now I know. And then I came in the next day. We went on the air with the aftermath of, as they were still putting out the fires and everything, and it was definitely I don't think I was 100% mentally here because I was still thinking about what was going on at
Oh, I
home, my
bet.
neighbors, my friends, what was happening to them. But it's a challenge. It's a tough thing, and the best thing is it doesn't come up too often where we're in that situation.
That's good. Let me change over just for a second.
Yeah.
You know, I once interned over at KTVU in Oakland. Dennis Richmond
Yeah, I grew up watching him.
was there. And I remember one night talking with Dennis. Now,
Oh,
Dennis can sometimes be a very emotional guy. In fact, I remember one time we were sitting there and we went to a commercial break. And we had just played a VO, which is where the anchor's talking over the video, for those who don't know. We went to a commercial break, and he threw his papers at the cameras. He goes, you know what, we just showed video, and I had no sense of when that was, because it wasn't about what I was talking. He goes, I want a reference. If we're showing something, if it's filed, I want a reference in my script of what it's talking about.
Okay.
Because if it's not making any sense, and he went off, and he was telling everybody, I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Him and I talked later, very nice guy. He's like, he goes, I just felt very passionate about, you know, if you're going to be showing something and talking about it, people need to have a sense of what they're looking at.
Oh, he's right.
And I thought that was one of the important things I learned early when I started doing editing. But my question for you is the fact that he started off as a beat reporter. He said he would stop any day being an anchor person to be a reporter if that's what it had to take. Do you have those same kind of passionate feeling, or have you kind of gotten so much used to into anchoring?
Well, you know, I think I do, and you know, up until recently, my shift, my job duties were to anchor the 5, 6, and 11 o'clock news, and then we added the 4 o'clock news. So for a little while there, I was anchoring and not doing much else, just because that's the time didn't allow. And so now I've shifted my schedule, so I come in earlier in the day, start at 11, and work on stories is the idea, and then anchor the 4, 5, and 6, and then Karen Griffin anchors the 11 now. So it was actually my suggestion, and the station was supportive and receptive, but I didn't want to just be anchoring the news and not have time to do anything else. I wanted to have some type of combination. You know, that's the station wants me anchoring the newscast, but I also wanted to be able to report, get out and do interviews, cover stories, and be contributing to the news that way, not just reporting it. And so it works out well. It's a great combination now. I just started it a few weeks ago, but it's good for me because I get to do both, and I think it works for the station. But I don't think I'd be comfortable just reading the news and just coming in and reading other people's stories.
Right.
And I could see if that's where Dennis was coming from. You do get a passion for the reporting, you know, an adrenaline rush sometimes, especially if you're doing maybe some investigative pieces or whatever, you know, even if it's features, whatever you like to do. I like to do the investigative stuff and sink my teeth into stories, and that's what really gets my blood pumping, gets me excited, and feels like I'm, you know, really contributing and doing something worthwhile. So it's nice that I can have the time to do it now. So I would be missing that if I couldn't do that.
Well, let me end this with two different questions. One is, do you find yourself being always everywhere you go in Reno? I mean, it's not the biggest town in the world, but it's a small town. Everybody knows Joe Hart.
You know, it's not like that necessarily, but people do ask me about that. And you know what I tell them? It's hit and miss. You go to the grocery store and you can't get out of there because everybody wants to say hi. Or sometimes you go to someplace and nobody knows who you are. You know, Reno's a funny town that way too. But you know, it does happen. You know, it's part of the territory. And what I always tell people, I would say 99% of the time people are nice and friendly when they approach me, which is so wonderful. I mean, I can hardly even think of something where somebody maybe had a complaint about a story or was negative. Usually it's always nice, and it's what we want, you know, in this business.
Right.
You want to have a connection with the viewers, and it's gratifying, not just from an ego standpoint, but when somebody says, hey, Joe, you know, and they know what station I work for, and they know what I do, or they know some of the stories I do. It's really gratifying to know we're making that connection. And so I think in my position, if you didn't like that or didn't embrace that, it wouldn't make sense. You know, we're out here every night doing the news and reporting the stories and hoping that people connect with us. And so then if people see you at the store and want to say hi or ask you a question, that's what you want. You know, if it didn't happen, I think that's when you'd be sort of concerned, why aren't people, you know, connecting with me? And I hope my personality is such that people feel comfortable, you know, coming up and saying hi. And
Well, I can attest that it is.
Good. Oh, thank you. Good.
Well, let me ask you this one last question so we can wrap this up. I always look at our pieces, the packages that we refer to as the 90-second documentary, because sometimes you never really know how the story is going to go from the time you start it till you end it. Sometimes you'll uncover things that you didn't know were going to be there. So it's interesting by the time you have to voice it and cut it. sometimes it can turn out to be a different story than what you had gone out to do. In your years, and this might be a big question for you, but in your years of reporting, has there ever been a story that you went out to do that probably has really impacted you in a way that you never thought it would?
You know, it's hard to pin down just a couple, but as I look back, one story like you're talking about that sort of changed direction, a woman called me from out in Fernley and said she didn't get to vote in a city council election. And I thought, that's odd. And we started looking into it. We went out and interviewed her. It turned out her whole street was left off the rolls and didn't get their ballots. They didn't get to vote. And we went to the city and the county at the time, this is maybe 3 years ago, they said, well, that happens, and we're not really going to do anything about it. And I was surprised by that. It just seems like everybody should get the chance to vote, whether it's city council or president of the United States.
Right.
We kept pushing, and we did find that it was a fair number of people who were impacted and left out. And by the time we were done, it was hard to get the city and county officials to talk to us about it, but eventually they agreed and they redid the election and let those people vote. The results did not change, but at least in the end those people got to vote. So what started out was one woman's concerned phone call to the station about being left out, and it turned out it was her whole neighborhood that was impacted, and the city and county at first didn't want to do anything, and in the end, because of our stories, they agreed to send out ballots again and do the election again. So that was gratifying. As you look back, it was something where we caused some change that I think needed to happen, and it wasn't anything for us, but just for the good of these people in Fernley who were left out. So I always look back, and that was a tangible result that was a good result, I felt like.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to end off this is the fact that how do I want to word this? Whenever I have conversations with people, and especially from competing stations, they're always saying, you know, I'm glad I get to work with this person, I'm glad I get to work with that person. And Joe Hart, you're one of the few people I feel very proud and honored with saying, you know what, I can consider Joe Hart a friend of mine and a colleague of mine. And Joe, I'd like to thank you for coming on here. I know you spent a lot of tireless hours doing stories, and we appreciate it. And on behalf of News 4 and Profiles, thank you for coming on. And we'll have to have you on again to talk about some other stories that you've done.
Great. It's
You're
fun
a
to
great
talk
guy,
about.
Joe.
I appreciate
Thank
it,
you very
Scott.
much.
Thank you. Great.
I am Scott Birmingham, and this has been an episode, and thank you for watching, of Profiles.